Okay.
Ka pai. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi o te pō, and welcome to those who are online for a conversation around some traffic and design issues, particularly tonight centred around Flockton Street, but in general discussing the area downstream of the Northern Corridor. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. I've got apologies from our board chair. Emma Norrish is unwell. Simon Britton, I'm the deputy chair. I've met, I think, most of the residents who we're expecting tonight. And if I haven't, nice to meet you. Apologies from Ellie Jones as well. Expectations tonight is for an opportunity for staff to further share some material that was shared with the board a couple of weeks ago now. And some of those online might already have had an opportunity to watch the recording of that briefing of elected members. I will just ask to go around for some introductions in a minute. Our timing tonight, we're booked in for an hour till 8:15. I'm okay if we go a little bit longer, depending on timing. I do want to wrap us up by about 8:45 at the latest, just out of respect for everybody's time. And I have a personal commitment of my own. I need to go and collect a child from somewhere after that. While staff are speaking, if other participants could please keep themselves muted, and we'll likely hold questions until we reach a point where it's easier to take those, as opposed to sort of firing questions in as we go. I think that's all my question, all my sort of opening comments. What I'd ask is we might go around. It's a little bit difficult to do this when we're not sitting around a table, but perhaps if, first of all, I can ask those members of the public who are with us, if you're able to, just to briefly unmute and just let us know who's online. Just introduce yourself, who are you, and be interested to hear as well if you have watched the briefing that the board has published already, just so we know sort of who's seen what already.
G'day, yeah, it's Dave Chapman here. Yeah, I have watched the briefing, and yeah, I think I've met a good number of you online. We attended an open session, I guess it was last year, with most of you, alongside Jo, just joining now. I was going to say she's sick as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if she's not here, but there she is. So yeah, watched the briefing, and yeah, yep.
Cool. Thank you, Dave. Who else have we got, please?
I'm Angela. I live on the corner of Westminster and Flockton Street. I haven't seen the briefing, but I've read all about it through multiple emails and social media posts.
Cool. Thanks, Angela. Kia ora, Jo, I can see you, but I can't hear you at the moment. If you're in a position to give us a quick hello.
Oh, hey, yeah, hi, kia ora. Sorry, I'm not sure what you want me to say.
Oh, just checking who's online. Interested to know if you have watched the recording of the briefing that staff gave to elected members, and also just letting you know, sorry, just because you've joined after I said it, we are recording this. If you wish to leave your camera off, you're welcome to, but you're welcome to leave your camera on too. We may publish this on our Facebook page or YouTube channel.
Cool.
But yeah, checking, have you had an opportunity, or have you seen the briefing that the board received?
No, not at all. I have talked to Dave about it and talked to others who saw it, but no, I haven't watched it myself.
Okay, fine, thank you. Do we have any other members of the public online? Otherwise, I'll just ask, let's do elected members, and then I'll hand over to staff to introduce and start the presentation.
Kia ora, I'll jump in. Pauline Cotter, I think I know I've met most of you, so thanks for coming along tonight, and thanks for chairing this, Simon.
Kia ora koutou.
Mike, Community Board Member, City Councillor. I also chair the Urban Development and Transport Committee at Council as well. Good evening.
Thank you. And staff and I guess contractors and so on. Over to you.
I'll go. So I'm Anne Tomlinson and I am the engagement advisor on this project. And I think there's a couple of other council people here as well.
I'll go. Ross here. I'm the senior project manager and also looking after the STEM project as well as the CNC. Good evening.
Yeah, Shane Turner. I'm a transport engineer for Abley, a consulting company, and I was employed by the council to be an independent expert looking at the downstream effects of the motorway and prepare a report. And I've got an ongoing role to provide advice to the council.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Catherine Evely. I'm with Oricon and working with the council in the consultant role as part of this work.
Evening, I'm Chanel Sanakji. I'm a transport engineer at Oricon and I'm also helping out the council.
Mitchell Cockin here, also transport engineer with Oricon, helping out with the work we've been doing on this for council.
Mark Saunders, I'm the community board advisor.
Good evening, my name is Matthew. I'm the governance manager for the Waipapa Community Board.
Lovely. I think that's everybody. Apologies if we've missed someone, please do jump in. Otherwise, I will hand over to staff. If you could please run us through the material. Maybe if you can give us a sense of how long we can expect that to take. And then we'll hold questions to the end of that as the plan.
Yeah, so I've got, this is Catherine here. I've got Chanel sharing the screen there. So this is our agenda. We're 15 minutes behind already because introductions took longer than we thought. We've put it in there for an hour. We find sometimes it depends how much discussions and questions that we've got, but we've sort of separated this into 3 sections, just some background that you coming up to the information today. Some of the analysis we've done through some modelling and then looking at some traffic calming measures as well. So we'll just pause at the end of each of those 3 sections to take questions, and between Chanel, Mitchell and I will be presenting different parts of that to give you some variety and presentation. So yeah, we'll get on with it. Over to you, Chanel.
Hi, so I'll be providing some background data on what we've done so far on this project. Last year in August, we started off with a community survey. So that survey ran for a month and it was open online. We also did some face-to-face interviews with residents on Flockton and Francis. And the feedback from that survey provided us with some more in-depth information as to what issues residents in the area and particularly on Francis and Flockton were facing since the opening of CNC. And we used that information to then dig deeper into trying to understand why those issues were occurring. So we did that via site visits, and we also installed cameras at 6 intersections in the study area to try and observe those driver behaviors or those speeds or some of those movements that residents were noting as concerns. Out of that community survey, specifically on Flockton, some of the feedback showed us that longer journey times, particularly at Flockton and Warrington, was a concern. And safety issues also came forward as a prominent concern for residents on that street, particularly around cyclist movements, pedestrian crossing movements, and speeding down Flockton. We used the feedback from the survey to kind of act as a foundation for forming the objectives of this project. And those were to improve accessibility for active modes, to improve safety for traffic in the area and to try and improve the efficiency at intersections in the study area.
So I'll just add to that, there was a lot of comments that came through too, and we've recorded them and are aware of that, but that's just trying to roll it up to a high level objectives.
So we also went in deeper to try and understand what was happening on the street. And one of the things we did, as you're seeing on the screen right now, is graph the traffic volumes that are occurring on a weekly basis on Flockton. So this first point you'll see, hopefully you can see my mouse. The first point you see on the graph is the baseline data. So this is traffic volumes on Flockton Street that were prior to CNC opening from 2018. And the next point you'll see is the traffic volumes that occurred straight after CNC opened in 2020. After this point, you'll kind of see the traffic volumes bouncing around a little bit, and I'll explain why some of that is occurring. When the trials were put in on Francis, we can see that the traffic volumes on Flockton increased quite a bit. So these red markers represent the weeks where the left in, left out trial was put in place on Francis. And these brown boxes represent when Francis Ave was cul-de-sac. So we can see a corresponding increase in traffic that occurred on Flockton. When the sinkhole repairs were done on Flockton Street, we can see that there was quite a significant drop in traffic, as would be expected. And we've done a similar exercise to graph the traffic that occurs on Francis Ave. And we've done this to kind of showcase that once those sinkhole repairs were occurring on Flockton, we can see a corresponding increase in traffic that occurred on Francis. Similarly, when the trials were put in place on Francis Ave, we can see that the traffic volumes dipped quite a bit. And during those weeks, we can see the traffic kind of illustrates that when something's done on either street, it tends to push traffic onto the adjacent street. We also tried to understand what was happening with the traffic volumes in the study area as a whole. So this blue line you see on the graph represents the combined traffic volumes that occurred on Forfar, Francis, and Flockton in 2018, so prior to CNC opening, and that's sitting at around 6,500 to 7,000. The orange line represents the traffic volumes combined for Francis and Flockton since the closure of Forfar Street. So this is sitting below that blue line, and that tells us that while the traffic volumes on Francis and Flockton have increased, overall in the study area, the traffic volumes have decreased since CNC has opened. So that tells us that Cranford Street has pulled some of that traffic away from this area. This graph depicts the percentage of heavy vehicles that go down Flockton Street. This orange bar represents the baseline, so 2018. We can see that that was sitting at around 4%. And after CNC opened, we can see that the percentage of heavy vehicle volumes down Flockton Street have decreased to around 3% to 2%. This graph represents the 85th percentile vehicle speeds down Flockton Street. And again, this orange bar represents the 85th percentile speed back in 2018, and that was around 55 to 56 kilometers per hour. And we can see since CNC opened that that has come down somewhat to around 50 to 52 kilometers per hour. We did dig a little deeper into the vehicle speeds down Flockton. So this graph represents an average day, and these little leaders represent the number of vehicles doing a speed within this range. So for example, 287 vehicles on an average day travel at between 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. So we can see that the majority of vehicles down Flockton Street do 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. And that kind of represents or aligns with what that 85th percentile speed is. But we can also see that there are instances of vehicles doing speeds much higher than that. So we can see that there's a significant number of vehicles doing up to 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. And we can also see that there's instances of vehicles going up to 90 to 100. We've plotted a similar exercise for Francis Ave. We know that this is a different road environment. It is narrower and there is traffic coming down Francis, but we wanted to kind of understand what that traffic calming may be doing. So we can see that the 85th percentile speeds down Francis still sit around 45 kilometers per hour, but those upper limits have reduced. So we're not seeing as many instances of vehicles going up to 80 to 90 kilometers per hour. So that may be cutting off, those treatments may be cutting off some of those higher speeds. And we've brought this in to kind of introduce what traffic calming may potentially do down Flockton, which we'll speak to later in the presentation. I'll hand over to Mitchell, who will speak to some of the function classifications for Flockton Street, and then we'll go to questions afterwards.
Yeah, hello everyone. So we've done a bit of traffic modeling in this area just to have a look at the traffic patterns. And this diagram is what we call a bandwidth diagram, and the thicker lines represent how much traffic is on those roads. So you can see this diagram sort of shows where that Flockton Street traffic is coming from, and from this you can see that a lot of it is coming from that local area. We did question whether some of it had come from CNC once that had opened and then was traveling down QE2 and sort of running via Innes Street and Westminster Street to get to Flockton Street. But what this is telling us is that a lot of that traffic is actually generated in that local area. Do you want to go to the next slide, Chanel? And again, similar thing is shown for the PM peak. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the road network. So in transport planning, we have quite a linear road network based around local streets, collectors, and arterials. Flockton Street is currently a local road, and you can see the yellow street adjacent to Flockton Street is labelled as a collector. But what we've found is Flockton Street is actually performing the function of a collector road in this route, and that's because there is a bit of a desire for local traffic to connect onto Westminster Street and Barbados Street, and it's sort of pulling traffic from some of that surrounding area, which is why we're seeing higher volumes on that street than maybe Alsford Street, which connects onto Hills Road and is potentially a harder or longer route to connect on to the likes of Barbados Street. And I think that's a point that's quite relevant later on when we talk about traffic coming. So you can see here is some data we picked up for Flockton Street. So the average daily traffic is 3,500 vehicles per day. The heavy vehicles on average is over 100 vehicles per day. It's a bus route with a 30-minute frequency. And also it provides a cycle connection between Westminster Street and Barbados Street cycle lanes. And if you can see the diagram on the left, this is again just showing that road hierarchy. This has come from NZTA's road classification system. So you can actually see the top one shows what you'd expect for a local or access road. And you can see those volumes are more like less than 1,000 with heavy vehicles less than 25, whereas what we're seeing on Flockton is aligned with these red circles, which is more aligned with a secondary collector or a primary collector road. And Council's definition of a collector road is quite good. It says roads that distribute and collect local traffic between neighbourhood areas and the arterial road network. They act as local spine roads and often as bus routes within neighbourhoods, but generally do not contain traffic signals. Their movement function must be balanced against the significant property access function which they provide. So what we've found is that Flockton Street acts really like a collector road rather than a local road. And I guess one of the best things we could do, I guess, to make the roads safer would be to get traffic volumes down. So we started off our analysis by investigating what options might be possible to reduce those traffic volumes before we looked at traffic calming. Traffic calming does become a bit challenging when you get higher traffic volumes, especially once you get up to that sort of 3,000 vehicle per day mark. So you want to jump into the next slide, Chanel. So yeah, before we move on, any questions about that?
What I think we'll do, because we're quite small in number, if you've got a question, Dave, Joe, Angela, I think just ask it. I don't think we've got enough people to justify needing to put digital hands up and things, but if it gets too awkward, we might drop back to that. But yeah, if there are questions, please just speak now.
I do have one. If we can go back to the slide that looked at Flockton Street speeds, please. And keep going, sorry. Sorry, keep
the one before.
Yeah, I think so. It's the bar graph. I'm not sure why. Can you explain to me, because this isn't my area of expertise, how you can ascertain a downward trend, as you've indicated with that dotted line, when clearly the data on the right-hand side of that graph is well above the line?
Oh, I'll answer that. So this is just a general trend based on the average of those numbers. So there is definitely an increase back on this end, but this is just representing a gradual decrease overall.
I don't think our intention is saying, I think that's just a line that's been put in there to show the trend. I don't think it's insinuating that the speed's necessarily trending down and going to continue to trend down. I mean, those 40k speed limits were put in there, around that same time. So sometimes it takes a time to adjust to that, but we're not inferring that that's going down and continue to go down. That's probably not the intention of that line.
That's cool, thank you. And when you look, if you can go to the next graph, please. I just want us to really note that when you look at this graph, there are over 330 odd vehicles a day that are traveling down our street speeding. And if you think about that in terms of the numbers that we have going down our street, that's roughly 10%. So this is that we may be we may be a collector road, but that really concerns me. On that, I also just wanted to, if you go back to the bit where you're talking about Aylesford Street being the official collector road, but Flockton Street being the non-collector road, but we've been given that function. I think it's really important that you guys note, and you didn't note, that actually that's because Aylesford Street has speed humps down it. And the reason that we don't have speed humps down us is because it was removed. And the other point to note too is that Flockton Street is behaving like a collector. And I'm interested whether or not you have any indication of how long we've been a collector road, because we are the only one of those streets that has no traffic calming at all. And we have had no traffic calming trialled since the CNC opened. So although we may be behaving like a collector now, that is because there has been a 100% absence of any traffic calming at all on our street since the CNC opened.
Yeah, we completely hear you, Joe, and I think there are options in terms of traffic calming. So bear with us. We'll go through those. We're not saying that it shouldn't be done, and when we can see the speeding there, we're very conscious that there was traffic calming there in terms of the speed cushions previously that was put in around 2006 or something like that.
Correct.
What do you recollect about why those were taken out?
I understand they were taken out because there were residents further down the road who had cracks in their houses because of the vibrations. And
Vibrations, okay. Yeah,
I can tell you that as somebody who's sitting in a house that is still earthquake damaged, because I've got a void under my house that there's a huge argument as to how to fix, that this, which is reminiscent of the sinkhole that was further down the road. Geotechnically, this land is weak.
No,
So
we have heard that coming through in terms of vibrations and noise and all that. So
yeah, and the electric buses have made it worse. And, you know, while I appreciate that, you know, you guys have done a lot of work, and I can see that there's been a lot of work done since we came to speak to you, and you've got 4 consultants, you know, on a call, which is lovely on a Thursday night. There's clearly a lot of money being spent, but there's been nothing done practically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
bear with us, but we'll move through it. Oh,
I think
sorry.
you might be, you might need to allow the rest of the
topic.
presentation. Yeah, and perhaps come back to that at the end.
Cool.
Just checking if there's any other questions on the material that we've seen though before we move on.
Yeah, can I just check about the it's back a few slides, just about the first baseline levels for the volume. The original data, and then showing through to what we've got today. Okay, 2,400.
2,411, yeah.
Okay, and we're saying it's 3,500 now.
Thereabout, yeah.
Yep, and so is that now with the COVID impact, or is that now with the modelling?
So we've cut it off past this point, because we can see afterwards, once COVID set in, that the traffic volumes did start to decrease. So we've tried to remove that from this graph to avoid throwing it off.
Okay. All right, yep, cool, thank you, thanks.
Cool, unless there's anything else, we'll hand back for the next part.
Right, so I'm just going to take you through some of the wider area options. Now this, to do this, we have gone through some modelling to inform this. To do that, we did have to, there was a model that was already there. We had to make sure that was really representative of what is happening in that area. So that went through what we call a calibration, a validation process to make sure it was fit for purpose for doing this work. And so we just had to work through the due diligence of that so that we were correctly informed in terms of where we landed on this. So as part of that, we looked at a number of options. One of those was opening Forfar Street, another one understanding the implications of the bus lane changing to a second lane on Cranford Street, signalising Flockton and Warrington, and then looked further wider afield at, say, signalising Alsford or signalising Hills. I guess the intention was, are there options in this toolbox of trying to shift the traffic off the roads? And we're looking further than just doing road closures on Francis or Flockton, because effectively we had data around that. So we will just take you through what came from that in terms of the first 3 options, because they are the closest to your area, and the other 2 didn't show any significant impact. So the first one was around opening Forfar Street. So the next slide we've got here is, there are 2 colours here. So the red shows where you get a traffic volume increase, and the green is where you get a decrease in traffic volume. So that's comparing what we call our base model. So it's our current situation to the option of opening Forfar Street. So you can see there that Forfar Street becomes a very attractive route, and there's a significant traffic volumes increases on there, and that is due partly to its proximity of Cranford Street and that desire line that goes straight into Address Street there. So that,
sorry, just a quick question, because
very
it is
high,
relevant.
but the more important thing.
Oh, sorry, just a quick question because it is relevant to this. Are you comparing the data with Forfar now being closed or Forfar before it was closed?
No, we're comparing it to Forfar now closed. Yeah, so our base model that we're comparing it to is what's happening on street now. And so we've said if we open that now, because that's what would happen in reality, we would open it now, and this is what would happen if we opened it now. So the aspect of that, if you just bear with me, I'll go through all the, there's a bit, we can come back to it, but I'll just take you through this to start with. You can see that it also drags traffic a lot through those other local roads. We get increases all the way through. So it's not just an increase on Forfar, there's a wider increase, encouraging more traffic through all the surrounding areas. So it's a real attracting route through that. So there are some drops on Forfar, Flockton, sorry, Francis, which is with the thicker green line, and some small reduction on Flockton, but you can see that's very, very thin. So this one is showing the AM peak, so that's why it's showing the inbound. And on the next slide, that shows what happens in the PM peak. A lot of comes up Madras and might come through Forfar, and again does a lot of increased traffic volumes on those surrounding roads. Onto the next slide. So this is in terms of, we can go back and talk to any of these at the end, but we'll just go through each of them. So in terms of the bus lane removal on Cranford Street, so in the option, so in the model, the base model is what's happening now in reality, and then what they've done is replace the bus lane with an additional traffic lane. You can see there's no hardly anything in there. That is not going to remove traffic volumes from that local area by adding in an additional lane on Cranford Street. And if we go to the next one in the PM peak, you'll see that as well. So I guess that's just confirming that any changes to the layout on Cranford Street will again not have any impact on that local area traffic going through there. And then on to the next slide. So we also looked at signalising Flockton and Warrington. Now this came from some of the feedback that came through in terms of the difficulty in trying to turn out of Flockton. So we've got a video there. Do you just want to play the video, Chanel? So this is just an example of
hopefully this is.
Does it play?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think it's
okay.
working.
Well, I'll talk you through that. What we find is we can send it through later, but we find there's quite a bit of traffic that does build up. We see that happen, and then it can take a while to get out if you're at the end of that queue. So that could take some time, but then once that starts moving, the queue clears quite rapidly. So on the average, you're turning less than 30 seconds waiting, but for the worst case scenario, if you've joined the back of the queue, it might be up to a minute. What you can also see that sometimes you turn right and then there's a queue of people trying to turn left into Barbados, so sometimes that gets filled up and they can't turn out of there as well. But apologies on that video. Go through to the next slide. But what we've found in the modelling is that if we signalise that intersection, actually doesn't help the delay in getting out of that intersection. So that the red part here is showing that the delay will actually get worse. So this one here, instead of traffic volumes, it's showing the level changes in delay. So even if we signalise it, it won't necessarily, on average, help you get out of there faster. It also doesn't appear that will attract more traffic to that street. So a a hypothesis was maybe if we signalise it, that will actually attract more traffic to your street and be counterproductive in what you're trying to achieve. So it doesn't indicate that will happen. Yeah, so that's a discussion point we can have later. Is there is an option, it won't improve the delay in getting out of there, but users might find it easier to get out and safer to get out. So yeah, I guess it's an option on the table for you as a community to decide whether that works for you or not. And that's just similar in the PM peak. What that will do is introduce more delays on Warrington Street as well. So whether it achieves anything useful for you is something we can discuss. So on the next slide, we've just got a summary of where we've landed on that traffic analysis. So as mentioned earlier, the idea here was seeing if there were options that would attract traffic such that it would reduce traffic volumes on Flockton Street. As we discussed earlier, Flockton Street is acting like a collector road. We're not saying that's wrong or right, but that is the nature of how it's operating at the moment. None of those wider network improvements will reduce, they will not reduce the Flockton Street traffic volumes. Opening Forfar Street creates significant issues on Forfar and the wider network, and doesn't show that it will have significant reductions on Flockton anyway. The signalisation of Flockton Warrington will not address the congestion objective, but it could improve the ease of movement and safety for all modes. And just reiterating that this is a bus route through there, so we have talked to ECAN. There's no intention to move the buses from that route, so that's something we have to work through in terms of design considerations. So once we've come to the end of that, given there's not much left in the toolbox to necessarily reduce volumes, then we take a further look at traffic calming that will fit within that environment and volumes that we're looking at. So when we look at traffic calming, which will be the next bit of presentation, we just need to keep in mind the appropriateness of that as a bus route and active modes and the traffic volumes. And just to note that in itself, although it might detract some traffic from using the road, it will not be a significant reduction in traffic, but the main objective and outcomes you get from that traffic calming is safer speeds and better driver behaviours, and that's we'll drop into that into the next part of the presentation. But we'll pause there for questions, because I anticipate there's a few there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for that. I guess for me, the questions that I've got are around the modelling, I suppose. The Forfar, I suppose, impact, and I guess that street was closed without consultation or trial. And I suppose my concerns are it's funneled traffic into two streets, and as we're focusing on Flockton tonight, but the impact on Francis has actually had more than percentage-wise than what Flockton's had. But for me, it's funneled traffic into two streets that aren't really designed as what you describe as collectors. Whereas Forfar was originally designed as a feeder road off the main one-way system into what has now become a motorway. So I guess I would challenge the data for a start, because it was measured off when Forfar was closed. And what does the data look like pre the CNC opening when Forfar was open? Is there any actual impact to the overall, what was happening with that system? And I suppose that's a question that potentially you could argue that's neither here nor there, but more importantly, I suppose, is there a way to funnel the traffic so that it doesn't impact your Mersey, Severns, and the ones where I guess there was some I'd say, legitimate concern that we don't want to cause a problem through there. To me, it's about feeding the network, feeding the motorway. But you've done something with a road that was originally designed as a a feeder to wider network and put it onto roads that are not. So I suppose we're just challenging the data to make sure we're making the decisions for the right reasons.
So I'm not sure if I've captured your exact question there. I think in terms of the data, I'm confident we have got that right. So what we're doing with this is we build a model to replicate how the network is operating at this moment in time. That is what we call our base model. Your base model already represents what's happening now.
And that's the problem.
Because that's where we are. No, because that's where we are now. So we need to say, if we move forward from this, what will that look like? So we have, they've got data. If you want to look backwards in time, they've got data on traffic volumes. That's why we showed you the baseline of what that looked like before in terms of the volumes going through Forfar, Francis, Flockton. And what's going through there now is actually less than what there was going through there before. So there is data before that, but the purpose of the model is to give us an indication of, if we put an option into place now, what would that now look like for the network? So I get what you're saying, that it's not replicating history, but that's not the purpose of it. It's to understand what's the implication of our options if we did that now.
But the point is, and this is the problem with the whole thing, is that the point is you took a road that was a feeder, you closed it, you then forced the traffic onto our streets and dramatically increased it. And now you're defending any reopening by comparing it to saying, well, this is what will happen. The traffic will increase radically on Forfar and showing us a big ugly red wine. Of course it will. It's a cul-de-sac now. You can't drive up there. My question is, you haven't considered whether or not you could block off Severn and Mersey north of Westminster. You could reopen Forfar and have it funnel back through that end of Westminster, which is commercial, onto Cranford, and that would make a difference for us.
So I'll just comment on that change. When we talk about that change, I get what you're saying. You're saying it's a change compared to not much now. But in terms of volumes, the data is actually showing that there'd be 9,000 vehicles per day on Forfar Street. That's the volumes it's showing that will attract at the moment. So that's way more than what we've got on Francis and Flockton. That's quite a difference in scale.
I believe that figure of 9,000 a day is above the pre-CNC, pre-closure traffic volume on Forfar.
Correct, yes.
As you would expect it would be, but how much over? Are you talking, because it was a big wide road, it had a lot of traffic. So is it increasing by 10%, by 20%? I really want to, this isn't just about Flockton Street, it's about Francis Avenue as well. And it's also about the residents of Forfar Street. I don't want them living a life that was worse than pre-CNC. But I also don't see why our streets are paying a price because of a decision to close that street. And without considering other ways that you could have mitigated the impact on Severn and Mersey. I mean, that was a feeder road, right? That was more than a connector. It was a really big, busy road. And now you're saying, oh, well, this is going to take a cul-de-sac and we're going to turn it back into a big, busy road. And that's not fair. But actually, let's be realistic about what it was.
So we the council have got that data. If no one's got it at their fingertips for this call, I'd like to see it circulated afterwards, please.
Yeah, we have got that number. We might be able to dive into it. It's yeah, it is definitely significantly more. I just don't want to quote the wrong number without checking it out. But yeah,
and the other point that I want to make, and I appreciate that this is a question for Environment Canterbury, but I'd like to understand what they've done to investigate the impact of the buses on our road, and also to investigate alternate routes, because there's no alternate routes probably isn't, you know, we're like, as I say, I'm sitting on a broken foundation. I feel every single bus that goes down this road, and the heavier electric buses. And don't get me wrong, I'm totally pro decarbonising the city and meeting our zero emissions, our zero carbon aspirations. But this is an unfortunate side effect.
I just wanted to make a comment about Forfar Street, because when we're looking at the downstream effects of the CNC, Forfar Street is a local street. It has the same classification as Flockton and Francis. So even though it's a big wide street, I remember straight after the earthquakes, all the people living down there having to live with all the vibrations from all of that traffic through there. So I don't think it's correct to call it a collector street, or it might have been acting like that, but it wasn't actually designated as that. And the residents in that streets obviously had concerns with the amount of traffic. And the modelling that's been presented indicates that there would be a big increase in traffic on that road, and that would pull traffic off Cranford Street, and onto a whole lot of other streets. Now, I get what you're saying about there may be other options with Severn and Mersey Street to try and prevent traffic rat running through those streets, but there'd be quite a lot of works involved in achieving the same effect we've had from closing Forfar Street.
Yeah, I guess, Shane, I mean, we've talked about this in the past. I guess the question is, and I mean, we don't want that happening, right? We don't want traffic coming off Cranford Street and into the area. That's probably the number one goal of the whole thing. And I guess if what we're talking about here is you know, for real, then you know, there's a fairly solid piece of evidence sitting in front of us. But I guess the question that I suppose we've talked about in the past is, could it funnel the traffic? Because I think, and this is where the modelling is as well, is the amount of traffic that turned historically before the CNC, that turned right out of Forfar and then went east. That's the traffic we're talking about that is coming on to Francis and Flockton. So I guess the challenge we've got is there a way to prevent it coming off Cranford, but spreading the load across those three streets and having it running, you know, I suppose, more efficiently? And if there's not, then I guess, geez, we're just about the end of the conversation, and then talk about traffic calming. But yeah, I guess that's what we've talked about when we've met before. And is there a way to funnel it in the mornings and in the evenings to service the east, and spread the load across, you know, I say a street that was originally designed that was feeding onto a main arterial, but really acting as a funnel, I'd say northeast.
Well, the issue is that with Mersey Street and Severn and parts of Thames Street are already quite calmed in terms of streets. They're quite narrow. And so really the only way to try and prevent people rat running through there would be to probably close all three streets at one point through there, which is quite a significant change to the network and an impact on the people who live in that area. So we've already obviously made changes to how people access Cranford Street by restricting turning movements there to try and prevent rat running, but it would be quite severe traffic calming to all of those streets to achieve the same effect that closing Forfar has achieved. So, and that would disadvantage a lot of people as well. So it's, in my view, what's been done is probably the better option in terms of traffic calming than doing closure of three streets.
I mean, I think you can go back to those slides when we looked at where's that traffic coming from, and it didn't show, and we were really interested in this, like where is it coming from? It's not showing. Oh, you're almost there. Yeah, so you can see in the AM peak. So what happens is this is showing one's driving into town. So it's looking what's happening on that side of the road, and you can kind of see where that traffic is coming from, and it's not pulling it off C&C, and it's not a thick line dragging it out and beyond. Like it is creating a function for those trips in the area to collect from the area and head into town where they desire to go. So I think when we're thinking of measures to change people's behaviours, they're only effective if it's going to interrupt where they want to head. Otherwise, yeah, just something to keep in mind. Or maybe we could. Oh, yep, Shane. Yes,
Oh, I was just going to suggest maybe we go to the next section.
Yep, sounds good.
And I'm conscious I want an opportunity to canvass all the material, and if there needs to be longer conversations or follow-up questions, we can deal with that offline or afterwards potentially, but I don't want people having to punch out without having seen everything that's here to see. I might, sorry, before you start as well, something I should have said at the start, but I'll come back to now. This is not a decision-making meeting we're having here. This is a information sharing. We're wanting to share what the council's got, but hear what we can from residents as well. And there will be some decision-making processes to follow this, but nothing we discuss tonight or don't discuss tonight is going to set anything in stone. Thank you. Sorry, back to the staff.
Cool. All right, do you want to flick to the next slide, Chanel? We're just going to talk to a few measures on Westminster Street and the access to Flockton before we get into the traffic coming on Flockton. So we did hear further feedback that crossing opportunities for pedestrians on crossing Westminster Street was quite important. So we are looking at accommodating some pedestrian refuge islands on Westminster Street to make that safer. So you can see in those orange dots, that's the locations we've identified for refuges, and that would just be a standard couple of islands with a refuge for pedestrians. Pop to the next slide. So yeah, that's just showing sort of what that looks like with some curb build outs to minimize the crossing distance also. Next slide. We looked at a couple of options for just slowing speeds down into Flockton as well. One option would be to do a paved threshold similar to what's on Francis Street, that should say Francis Street intersection. And another one is a speed hump as similar to Alsford Street intersection. Given it's a bus route, there's limited things we can do to change the curb geometry to tighten the corners to slow vehicles down, because we've got to allow for those tracking curves, and same with the pedestrian refuge islands, you need a bit of space to accommodate those. So we think we'll have to rule those options out, but these are two potential simple things that could be done to slow speeds on entering Flockton Street. Next slide.
Mitchell, just quickly on that,
Yep.
Already with the heavy bus, I live on that corner, and already with the heavy buses, the back wheel comes up on the curb and it totally shakes my house. So that would be just something. Already the buses are struggling to get around there. So it's just a consideration there.
Yep.
I think it's really significant for you to note, Mitchell, that the three residents you have in the room are Ange, who's on the corner, me, who lives next door, and Dave, who lives next door to me, because it is this corner that's where people speed around, and it's incredibly difficult for us to get out of our cars, to get out of our driveways.
And I've got 2 young kids in my car. The amount of near misses I've had because of the speed, but there is also the issue of the heavy buses now. It feels like an earthquake's just about to start every time a bus comes around every 30 minutes. It's horrible.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we're a bit of a tricky position, because the best thing to do to slow them down, I guess, would be speed humps. But then again, that's probably the worst thing we can do for
Shakes
the
the houses
vibrations
as well.
Yeah. So I guess it's about getting that balance right. And I feel like the threshold would probably be would have less impact on the shaking side of things, and would do enough to maybe just slow people down a little bit. So that's kind of why we presented that as an option.
Great, thank you.
So now I'll just go through some traffic calming options for Flockton Street itself. So we've really had a look at 3 options: raised platforms with curb build-outs, chicanes or narrowings, and then the speed humps again, which I guess we've just talked about. It's probably not a great option. So just when we go through these, I'll go through some of the advantages and disadvantages. But again, I just want to point out that because it is operating like, well, the volumes are more in line with a collector street, it does sort of introduce constraints and challenges with the traffic calming. Typically, traffic calming would be on streets that are more 2,000 or less than 1,000 vehicles per day. So you've already got quite low volumes. If you introduce aggressive traffic calming on a street with high traffic volumes, it can have some adverse effects and really make the street feel really congested. So I'm not sure that's something you may want as well, but we'll go through the advantages and disadvantages anyway and talk to some of that. So next slide. So the first option we looked at are these raised platforms. And there's just a few examples on the screen as well. And we tried to pick a few that were on existing wide roads as well, because that does have quite an influence on the speed too, as the existing width of the road. Obviously, it's Flockton Street's already quite wide at 12 meters. So it does feel like quite a wide open road. And you can do them at either intersections, or you can do them between intersections like we've got on the right there. Next slide. So the raised platforms they're effective at reducing the higher end speeds. So like Chanel showed at the start of the presentation, we're getting some speeds even up to 80, 90 kilometers an hour. So the speed platforms do reduce that. And with just horizontal measures, sometimes you don't get the same reduction in those higher end speeds. But in saying that, the platforms, you can drive over them comfortably at sort of 35 to 40K. So they might not have as big an impact on bringing down those sort of 50, 60K speeds. In terms of safety, there's ability to accommodate the curb build-outs, which improves the safety at the intersections and allows us to implement sort of safe pedestrian crossing opportunities as well. Buses, it's easier to navigate these speed platforms than the restrictive horizontal deflection devices. But again, there is a bit of a bump that can introduce some discomfort for passengers, but less so than a speed hump. Cyclists, it's probably easier and safer to navigate because there's buses on this route. With the chicanes, we don't want to do anything that would force the cyclists into the live traffic lane with buses or opposing vehicles. So we would have to implement bypasses, and there's some safety issues with those as well, which I'll talk about when we get to the bypasses. Noise, there is some element of noise with these. You do get a bit of acceleration and deceleration with the raised platforms, less so than the speed humps, but maybe more so than the horizontal deflection devices. These minimize conflicts, so you don't get those conflicts between opposing movements like you do with the chicanes. And these options also are quite nice visually, improve the look and feel of the street and give opportunities to introduce landscaping. Parking, they're also likely to will result in some parking loss, but it will be, if you implement them at intersections, it'll be less parking loss than what you'd get if you were doing, say, chicanes mid-block. So I appreciate that was a lot to take in, but I will just sort of show, just with these pink dots, if we implemented a raised platform at each intersection, it's actually quite good spacing along Flockton Street as well. So it's roughly 100-meter spacings. And what that does is it actually breaks up that forward visibility along the street. And that actually has quite a big impact on changing people's behavior as well. and that 100 meters is quite a good interval to achieve that. Next slide. So we sketched up a couple of examples of just what that could look like for those intersections. So you can see there we've done Thornton Street and Spate Street. So we'd still need to keep the curb to curb width reasonably wide, like I'm looking at 8.5 meters there. And the reason for that is we would want to allow enough room for the buses to get past cyclists as they're navigating these raised platforms. Now chicanes and narrowings. So we've got a couple of pictures there of examples on Mackenzie Street and Worcester Street. So these streets are, well, Mackenzie Ave's already narrowed, and Worcester Street's a wider street, but the volumes are significantly less, like we're talking less than 1,000 vehicles per day on probably both these streets. So next slide. So I talked about a lot of this when we talked about raised platforms, but in terms of speeds, they're effective at reducing speeds at peak times when you've got more traffic on the street because you've got more opposing movements. But at off-peak times, unless you've got some kind of vertical element, you can still get those really high-end speeds on the street. In terms of traffic flow, the frequency and severity of the chicanes can have quite a significant impact on congestion. At 3,500 vehicles per day, you're starting to get to those volumes where you do really notice those opposing conflicts, and you almost feel like you're kind of fighting your way down the street at those peak times. And yeah, like I say, the traffic volumes are generally higher on Flockton Street than other streets where we'd normally use chicanes. Noise, there is an element of noise to these as well, because every time you've got a vehicle slowing down to a stop to give way, you've got that acceleration and deceleration, which is generating noise as well. And as I said, with cyclists, for these options, we'd need to introduce an alternate bypass route for cyclists, so we're not forcing them into the path of opposing vehicles or buses. And that does introduce a bit of increased safety risk as well for where the cyclists transition back into the roadway, which just needs to be carefully managed. These also take up quite a bit of longitudinal space, so they do result in more parking loss, and that would be between intersections as well, where people probably want the parking more so than at the intersections. So that's something just to bear in mind as well. So on the screen, we're just showing where you could introduce 2 chicanes. I would be a bit nervous about implementing sort of five chicanes down the street at 100-meter intervals, because I do think that would make that street feel really congested, and you didn't be interested in introducing a lot of conflicts at that peak hour times. But there is potential, I guess, as we're talking about these 2 options, to look at mixing and matching as well. Like you might do some raised platforms at intersections in conjunction with some chicanes. There is those options we can consider. Next slide. So here's a couple of options we just drew up. Just go the one back. Yep. So there's sort of a couple of ways of doing this. The option on the left sort of shows full new curbs, which create the chicane. And you can see there we've drawn in the cycle bypasses, and you can see where cyclists pop out. It's a bit of a risky area for coming back onto the road, where Chanel's pointing now. And then on the right hand side, there's another way of doing it, is to do it with islands, and then just keep a bypass lane for the cyclists adjacent to the curb. And you can see from these images as well that they do take quite a bit of that longitudinal space and result in a bit of parking loss to accommodate them. Next slide. Speed humps and speed cushions, we did include these as they're probably the most effective at reducing speeds. The speed cushions probably less effective at reducing speeds than the speed humps, but they do have advantages in that the buses can get through them and cyclists can get through them a bit easier. Next slide. Yeah, so
but we're very aware that they have been in there before and haven't worked, but just wanted to put it all out in front of you, that it's been, yeah, looked at, I guess.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go through this. So they are more effective at reducing speeds. They probably create more noise, more discomfort for bus passengers, less impact on parking loss, and probably less impact on cyclists. Obviously, the speed cushions where cyclists can ride through them are better. Next slide. And again, we'd look at a similar spacing for those. Next slide. So we just tried to summarize everything on one page, and we've put it in a little table down the bottom just so you can sort of get a comparison visually for what I've just discussed. So red obviously being the worst outcome and green being the best. So raised platforms, they can be integrated with curb build-outs and increased landscaping, which will break up that forward visibility of the road, which will encourage better driver behaviour. And then that would also increase safety at intersections and give us opportunities to create safer pedestrian crossing points. The risk is with that, it may not have a dramatic impact on reducing speeds, given that the bumps often not that aggressive, but yeah, they will. That visual element would go a long way to reducing speeds, and they'll reduce those higher end speeds. So they're probably more suited to a road with higher traffic volumes and buses and cyclists like Flockton. Chicanes, unless you installed them at quite frequent intervals, I think they'd have limited impact. And if you installed them at those really frequent intervals, they would make that street feel really congested and introduce a lot of opposing conflicts and result in a lot of parking loss. And with the vertical element, like I say, they might not reduce those higher end speeds, especially at off-peak times. We did think about the possibility of trialing some of those options and just see how they go if there was a preference to try some chicanes. Speed humps would have the most impact on reducing speed, but also have a lot of impact with noise and vibration and not suitable really for buses and cyclists. And just the last point on there, Catherine, did you want to mention about the resurfacing?
I don't know. I think Ross could talk to this maybe about there is resurfacing like scheduled coming up, so it's certainly an option to consider resurfacing that whole street.
Yeah, I'll just say it's due for a reseal financial year. So whatever we do, we'll do a reseal with this work that's in Flockton. There's program for that.
Cool. And did we have any other slides? Or that was the last one. So yeah, a lot of time packed there, but any questions on it?
Yeah, I do. So just in regards to the raised platforms, do we know what effect with the heavier buses now? Do we know what the effect will be of the heavy buses going over, was it 5 of the suggested raised platforms going down the street? Because in the past, I think Joe and Dave, with the speed bumps, were they causing shaking of houses and damage to houses previously? What type of impact will the heavier buses be going over the raised platforms?
Yeah, I knew I would get asked this question. I can't answer that at this stage. The impact would definitely be less than a speed hump, but I think we'd have to do some more investigation on what that might mean. The vibration is probably coming a lot from the underlying soil and pavement conditions. The pavement might not be as, I guess, robust and as deep as it needs to be. So yeah, I'd probably have to come back to you on that one, and maybe there's some more investigations we can do on that.
Yeah, and even so, if we do look at fixing up the road, will that help as well with the heavier buses, because they do make quite an impact? And I do have one more question. Bus routes, is there no possibility of the bus route changing? Is that sort of out of the council's jurisdiction?
Yeah, we have spoken to ECAN because we wanted to I guess make sure they are aware of what we were proposing on Flockton. When we said there's no alternative to the bus route, that was That was more around, I guess, minor modifications to the bus route that would still allow it to keep a similar route to what it's got now. So that would be, for example, moving it onto Alresford Street and then having it cut back onto Flockton Street to get back onto Warrington Street. So we've kind of ruled out that because that would possibly just move the problem to other streets which are not suitable for buses as well. And ECAN said that they've got no plans to do that. And also they did ask them about whether there's opportunities to change the wider network. They said it's not on their radar to look at. It could be reviewed down the track, but it's not a priority. But also they said that if people did have feedback about that, they would take that on board. So I think they've got a feedback form that you can access on there.
Oh, I better fill that out then.
On their website, yeah. So they were more than happy to take feedback on that if that was something that was needed to be looked at.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
What is the decision-making process?
So that's sort of a where to from here, I guess. That's perhaps where we are up to now?
Yeah, it kind of is. I think that if I was you, I'd be pretty careful about suggesting speed cushions back on Flockton Street, given how hard the residents down, and I never had a problem with the speed cushions at all, but given the damage that was done to houses and the upset that was caused then, I think you might find some residents further down the street would be pretty upset to see that would even be considered at this point.
Yeah, I hear that, Joe, and we're very aware of that. I guess from this point is that we're keen to go back out to the community, but we were keen to understand, I guess, having this opportunity to talk to you guys about what you feel is completely off the agenda or is worth looking into, and just keen to have that discussion. So we've got this kind of slide here and thinking about some of those options we've presented, of any of them, because we've got different people emailing in saying we want this or we want that or I don't want this. So something will need to go back out to the community, but we're keen to work with you guys in terms of what we think. That
hey, Catherine, would it be a good idea if staff could give us some idea of how platforms are working in other areas, and even though there's not many areas that have the level of earthquake damaged, soils and that, but just an idea of whether they work well, if they're quieter than humps, just some feedback from residents who already have them might be helpful.
Yeah, because we did talk, that's what we talked to ECAN to say, have you got, you've got buses going over these devices and how's that going? They didn't seem to think it was problematic, and they have got them in other streets, but that's from their point of view. So yeah, I mean, it is worth looking into that further to understand really what those risks are around it. I agree, because unfortunately it's not something we can really trial. So the best idea is to maybe look at a bus route where we've got something similar and see if we can.
I think we know they're a lot different than speed humps, just driving over.
So Pauline, I think it was speed cushions that we had.
They're speed cushions. No, so yeah, they're speed cushions. So the speed cushions are the speed humps with gaps in them. So maybe just go back 2 slides there.
Oh yeah.
And I think they were they're those ones like on Rowley Street. That's what was there, and I think they might have even been plastic ones that were stuck on.
Yeah, they
are
were
the ones that we don't.
Yeah, they were.
We're not going to go full loop cycle.
I'd discount those. But
yeah,
I guess the question we want to, I suppose, try and have answered is this: with the platforms, what's the impact to the vibration? Is it large? That would be something, if we can try and qualify that.
Yeah, that's actually what I was meaning. The platforms, they look a lot more like they'd be acceptable, I reckon. Yeah,
I think we could also do some testing on your pavement there to see what it's like before they reseal it as well, to understand if there's something that can be done. There is something we would need to do before we resurface. So that will help put the whole picture together.
Yeah, a key consideration with them is the height of them and the gradient on the ramp. So, one of the key things you're trying to get from these is the color contrast and the fact that there is some vertical. It doesn't have to be a lot. If you make it too steep, then you'll get more shaking and vibration. So it really comes down to how carefully and well you design them. So that's something.
Yeah, sometimes we just do a color change, even without the height. Sometimes we want to achieve that. I am interested in hearing from you guys around the signalization of Warrington, Flockton. Is that just you're not interested in that at all, or is that something that's worth pursuing further, or it's just not going to achieve what you're looking for?
It didn't seem to have too many positives for me. There was a lot of negatives from the, I don't think that's, it's going to cause more grief, I think, with the downsides to it, with the, I think what was even presented in the video online, it showed that quite clearly as well, the amount of negative impact of having signals in there.
Okay.
I don't know if Joe or Ange got any other opinion on that as well.
I just think that my main concern is safety, and I don't see a traffic light down the other end of the street stopping people from speeding around the corner and, crashing into a tree like happened last Saturday night.
It definitely won't address that. You're right. Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing is, it's just you're then gonna ensure that traffic doesn't, at the moment, my understanding is the only time traffic queues down there is during peak times.
Yeah.
During the morning actually. And so you're just going to ensure that there's queues there more regularly during the day.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think our AM peak's actually quite short, but we're just conscious that what came back from the original survey. So that's probably where we're heading to, but we just wanted to socialise that with yourselves. What are your thoughts on the chicanes compared to these platforms? Because there was some questions about, so the chicanes are the sort of one-way narrowings. Does that?
I think do that down the whole entire street. Do it down the whole street, so we look like that street in San Francisco that goes like this. That's what I think.
How about Joe?
Something I should have pointed out too on these plans, I've shown a little speed platform in the chicane as well, which is quite often what we do to just slow down those higher end speeds. But it's an option.
I think I'd like to thank all the work that's gone into this. It's really quite clear now. I suppose we were all coming at it from different angles and trying to come up with solutions, and I guess it's obviously a really tough problem. And I guess to me, a couple of things that have been presented is around the speed and the safety. It's what you're saying, and it got mentioned a few times, is calming on a road with 3,000 plus vehicles on it is hard to do. So whatever we do is not going to work that well. That's what I've taken out of this. So I guess we're back to the earlier sections of how do we reduce the traffic down the street, and that's not really the time to take it.
I'll just put. I don't think that it won't work that well in terms of traffic calming. Like these chicanes will traffic calm the street, but we're saying because there's more traffic on it, like sometimes it can feel like there's more happening on the street because you've got traffic going past each other, or it just has a different feel to it in terms of doing traffic calming on a lower volume street. So it's not that it won't work and it won't reduce the speeds, because it will. It just has a different feel about it when you introduce traffic calming on a higher volume street. Does that kind of make sense? Because as you come up to these chicanes, if someone's coming in the opposite direction, you've got to like pause and let them in. So it kind of, there's a bit more mental capacity in driving down the street, and you see that interaction happening.
You'll have blockages that won't flow like a street. It'll be Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
saw
it does, yeah.
I saw a situation around the university where they have these in some of the back streets, and they blocked or closed part of Riccarton Road, and the street was just full of traffic with people trying to get through these chicanes. So that sort of demonstrated once you get above a certain volume, you do get quite a lot of congestion occurring on these streets, and even accidents because of the fact that the priority isn't always clear.
And you see
It's
it on
kind of like
Francis, right?
Francis Ave, yeah.
Yeah.
So they don't have chicanes, but they've got lots of cars parked there. So that is doing what the chicanes do, right, in a natural way, where you've got to pull and pull out. So that's got a lot less of volumes, but it actually feels a bit more. It feels busier because people are interacting more. So that's kind of what this will do. So it kind of depends for the residents what they want that feel of the street to be. Yeah.
It's a tough one. I think one of Catherine.
I have.
Oh, it's all right, Joe. If I just say something for a second. Thanks. I'm not too sure if it's touched on. Have we looked at the top of the street where Flockton, Westminster, and actually narrowing the entrance to it, so therefore cars can't go around it into it fast?
Yeah, that was like one of the first ones we came back. The problem we've got there is when the bus turns into there. So I think there were two options there on slide 39 there, Chanel.
Already narrowed a bit anyway. It's got that built out garden already,
That one
hasn't it?
there. So I guess there's only so much narrowing we can do to
Yeah, I
bring
don't
that
think you could.
round.
Yeah, because already the back wheels of the bus are already coming up over the curb when they try and turn. And when it's busy, they actually have to stop, because if there are cars turning from Flockton into Westminster, the bus can't get around. And during peak times, the buses are quite often stationary waiting for cars to turn onto Westminster from Flockton.
Okay.
I see, Angela, you've got a bus stop on Westminster, sort of just around the corner, that if the buses are using that, it's going to pull them tight against the curb.
Yeah,
Probably
it
making
does.
an even tighter radius to get around.
Yeah.
Then the other thing is, if we look to, I guess, trial something to see if, would chicanes be the easier thing to trial?
Yeah, you can trial like a horizontal deflection reasonably easy. The vertical one's a bit harder to trial. The other thing I was just thinking, I know you've talked about, is the vibration particularly bad at that top end, or is that just because I think we could look at the pavement and potentially it's not the whole street, but potentially there's something right at that top end where they're coming from that we could look at fixing the pavement through there in that area there that's particularly bad. Hope I'm not talking out of line here, but that could be something if there's an isolated bit that's particularly vibrating.
Do you have an understanding, Joe or Angela? I guess is there a lot of residents down the street that are affected by these vibrations, or is it localized areas?
I think there is, because the people in the middle of the street campaigned to get the speed bumps taken out when they were in originally. So I'd say it would be down the street. I'm not sure whether it's all the way down, but definitely in the middle, because we're aware of some people that were campaigning at the time to get them removed.
If there's anything could be done to investigate that, I'm sure that would be really valuable.
Highly likely to be the whole street. All the streets around here are buggered. Simon, can I just ask Ross to repeat? I put it in the chat. What year is Flockton due for a resurface? Again, is Ross still here?
20 years, I'm still here. Next year, it was programmed for next year, 23, is it 22, 23 or 23, 24? Well, certainly next, I'm pretty sure it's next year, I was told. We didn't go that and said, look, this could be part of that work. Pavement repairs, well, that's something different again. We'd have to go through and do some pavement investigation to see. But it sounds like to me, from reading the earlier geotech report that was done on the earlier, when the buses were traversing these speed humps and platforms, that they were certainly shaking the street. And that's why they were taken out. So I think that goes right down the street. Now, whether that's a fault of the pavement or not, I'm not. We'd have to investigate that.
Is that easily investigated? Is it a hard one? Because
no, it's not. No, it's not really.
If that's an easy fix, that could be a significant.
Well, it's not an easy fix. It's not the fix. It's an investigation is easy, but if we have to dig the whole street out, and replace it, we're talking a lot of money.
Oh, okay.
But still, it'd be worth doing the investigation if that's.
Yeah, we're going to do the investigation. Certainly,
great.
That was a question I've already asked.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross.
I'm just conscious of time. I don't want to cut this short, but I don't want to keep people here for a long time. I just want to check really what we need to do to close this and sort of what's next, both from point of view of the residents who are online and also from staff.
The only thing I want to.
I'm hearing half of somebody there. Sorry.
Has been. I'm a little frustrated to hear. Sorry?
Oh, Joe, you're cutting out.
Yeah?
Yep.
Oh, can you hear me now? Cool.
Yep, got you now. Yep, you've been
so the issue. Cool. Sorry. I just got to. So I am a little frustrated to constantly hear that because of the, our options for traffic calming are limited because we are a street that is over 3,000, that has over 3,000 vehicle movements a day. Prior to the CNC opening, we had 2,000. So we have 3,000 now as a direct result of the CNC. When you went out and consulted, it was with a promise that Flockton Street would have significant traffic calming. That hasn't happened. And now, because of partly the decision to close Forfar Street and not look at any alternative, which had 4,000, our traffic's increased, and now it's, sorry, you've now become a connector road or a collector road. So your options are limited. I appreciate this is a tough problem to solve, but actually part of the problem is being created for us because of the decisions that were made around the CNC. And the other question I have is, the other point is the modelling never showed, pre-CNC, the modelling never showed that the impact on Flockton Street would be as great as it is. So that makes me question very much how effective and how much trust we can place in the modelling we've been presented tonight.
I'm not sure who's responding there. I can say, I guess I know it's been a long time in taking you on this journey, and I appreciate your patience for that. I guess part of coming back to you was making sure there was a real rigor around that model. So that's the best tool we've got to understand this, and a lot of rigor has gone around making sure that it's fit for purpose. So I guess it's never perfect, but it's the best tool we've got in our pocket to inform that going forward. Yeah, that's just my comment.
Yeah,
on
but
that.
can you see that you're saying to us that we've got limited options because we're a street that has over 3,000 vehicle movements, whereas the 30, we've gone from 2,000 to 3,000.
Well, I think even that you were just under 2,500. I think even if you 2,000, the 2,500 or 400, we would be in the same in terms of having options in terms of traffic calming. That would be the same options on the table. I think the problem is, we've got this that it's combined, right? It's a perfect storm in terms of vibration and noise and all these other things happening as well, which would still be on the table regardless of the traffic volumes. So the options don't necessarily reduce for traffic volumes. It's just that we're just trying to be very upfront in terms of
And
what
the other
that
thing,
might look and feel like for you, I guess.
and the other thing is, I feel constrained that I don't feel like I can comment on what is the best option for Flockton until I know what you're planning on Francis. Because if you put in heavy traffic calming on Francis, then you will impact us with, the impact on us will be greater. So does that make sense? Like, I'm assuming Francis Ave has got a hell of a lot more options because they're not a bus route and the volumes are lower, and because they haven't been lucky enough to have made a collector road. The issue that do you know what I'm trying to say?
So Jo, can I just remind you that staff opened this meeting by saying that they recognised that whatever they did on one street affected the other. So I think they know that the relationship between the two streets, and I think we've got to have confidence that they're aware that they can't overcompensate one because it will have an effect on the other.
Well, that needs to go. That needs to be really noted.
We are going to have to close. I'm sorry. Can I just confirm with staff process from here, please?
I can probably jump in. So this is Anne. And so from here, I think the purpose, one of the purposes of tonight, we sort of were keen to get a steer from the residents, anything that was a no-go. We are going to be going out to consultation in regards to options for traffic calming on both Francis and Flockton, and part of that communication that will be going out is a bit of quite a bit of the information that was talked about tonight, and the sort of the wider network story, and understanding, as Pauline mentioned and Catherine mentioned earlier in the presentation, that whatever we do on we really recognise that whatever we do on Francis impacts Flockton, what we do on Flockton impacts Francis. So we've got a really good understanding of that and how we communicate that to the wider community. So I guess one of the purposes of tonight was to share some of the research and some of the investigation work that has taken place, but also if there's anything that the team have presented tonight that you feel as sort of representatives from Flockton Street that are just a no-go. I think we don't want to be putting information out or options out that are just not really an option that you would feel would be palatable to people in Flockton Street.
So do you want them to answer that tonight, or do they want to go away to the chat?
Not necessarily tonight. Thanks. We're starting to prepare the consultation material, and I think one of the benefits of having the meeting tonight was to try and keep things moving really quickly, because we really recognise that this has taken a long time, and I think one of the emails that came through sort of suggested perhaps coming to the board, and we thought by having the meeting we could sort of keep things moving a lot quicker than trying to wait for a board meeting, so that we can start to prepare the material. And we've got a lot of information to prepare, but we don't want to be putting options or information out that really is not something that we're just trying to keep things moving really quickly and trying to get information back so we can start to get things in place and things underway.
I'm just aware
from a calming perspective, sorry, Pauline, I think from a calming perspective, there's two realistic options. One's the platforms, but there's an unknown question about how much impact that will have with vibration.
So we can do some research around that. Perhaps you think that would help prior to that. Yep.
Yep, and the other one's the chicanes, I suppose, is another option, and that for me, that needs to go out to the street. That would be one that would want to qualify, see what people think, because both of them seem okay, but there's definite downsides to them, right? Like cyclist safety and other things with the chicane. So that's got to be taken into full consideration as well. So yeah.
And I think the other thing is the initial thoughts that we've had as a team is that when we put the information out, that we will do pros and cons of each option, so we can make it really clear. So if the preference of the street was for this option, what are the pros and cons of that? Because every option has pros and cons, and trying to be really because I mean what you heard tonight was a lot of information, and trying to get that information into into some consultation material that can then share to the wider community. I mean, we can put a lot of information online as well, so what we can't put on paper. So it's just to sort of get a general steer from you guys, sort of a bit of direction, so that we can keep things moving as quickly as possible and start to get things out. So absolutely, if there's any, if you're talking to other people or any information you want, very, very welcome to email me or through the community board or the governance team, and because we'll be working over the next few weeks to pull that consultation material together.
Yeah, just these chicanes, I'm assuming that you can let the cyclists through them by creating a path alongside the footpath, like there is on Aylesford Street.
You can provide bike passes. Yeah.
That's what we're looking at. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. I think that's us for tonight. If there are follow-up questions as you sort of reflect on what we've discussed and what you've seen, or further feedback, please do email it through. I'm sure everybody here has got contacts for either for staff or for elected members, so please do funnel that through. And clearly the the project team and our engagement staff will you'll hear more from them in the coming not too distant future.
Simon, should we have one point of contact? Would it perhaps go to Anne Tomlinson? I don't know, Anne, just guide me, but one point of contact would be really good, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy to be appointed because everyone's got my email, so yeah, absolutely more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Oh, you're lovely.
And could we grab a copy of the recording, please? Because I think it would be really useful to share it with everybody else on Flockton Street.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
Yep, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Get well, Joe.
Yes, I wish everybody good health and especially those who don't have it at the moment. And quick recovery.
Yeah, thanks, Simon.
Cool, thank you, Simon.
Cool, thank you all. That's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cheers.